Are we live now?
Yes, it seems.
All right. Hello, viewers. Welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA, our weekly 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time show. And today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic, from my point of view at least, is that why is it that Hindus are under attack globally? Did it happen before we didn't know about it? Or is it because we know about it now? Let's dive into this straight away. And I have great pleasure in welcoming one of our very good supporters and good mind, Ruchir Sharma. Ruchir Sharma, welcome back to the show. And of course, the indomitable, indefatigable Sanjay Dixit ji. Sanjay ji, both of you are welcome to the show, to
Namaste.
Jaipur Dialogue USA. Thank you very much.
Thanks
So,
for
as
inviting me.
I want to kick off by saying that, in the United States, particularly, there is a Father's Day, there is a Mother's Day, and everything else going on. We are celebrating Durga Puja right now. Many states have declared Hindu Heritage Month, not a day,
Mhm.
for Hindus in America. At the same time, there are people who are attacking us. And as I mentioned in the previous few words, that whether it is we get to know of it or it was happening earlier on and we didn't know about it because technology was not available. Because thanks to technology, I'm in New York, Ruchir is in Geneva, Sanjay ji is in Delhi. We are talking live at this point in time, sharing information, sharing knowledge. So the question here is, I will shoot off with you, Ruchir. Why is it? Why is it that people are paying so much attention to Hindus that they are shooting arrows on every single reason here or there, as if we are the creators of all the global problems? So think about it. There is a girl called Huma Dar at UC Berkeley. She's doing a presentation on uh, linking Brahmanism to colonialism and the plight of Kashmir because of Brahminical problems, in addition to the fact that there was a congressman from Maryland, Representative David Trone, who chastised his own representative in Delhi, telling him, "Why did you meet RSS?" And I tweeted on this. Let's kind of figure out. Everybody has freedom of speech. So speaking with RSS is not like United States speaking with Taliban. If you can speak with Taliban, why can't your rep talk to RSS? And let's do an historical analysis of this particular fact, that who has killed more people? The glorious jihad, the royal inquisitions and crusades, and all those things, and RSS. Who has killed people? Let's kind of do a data analysis. Your thoughts on this?
So, when it comes down to it, a lot of these public statements and public campaigns are a form of power play. And it's as Thucydides said, the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. And this is a result of being a soft target, that one can attack certain groups without any serious fear of retaliation or pushback. And this has been the case for a long time, for centuries, in fact. And if we look at the historical context of it, why was it that when foreign invasive forces came to the Indian subcontinent, be they Turkic invaders, be they Persianate empires, be they Portuguese, English, Danish, French, Dutch colonizers, they felt the need to degrade and demoralize the natives? It was because it served their interests. It serves their interests to have a submissive, passive audience, which can act, as not as a populace with agency, not with dignity, not with pride in itself, but rather just act as a source of cheap labor and a market for finished goods. That's the essence of mercantilist colonialism. And then, from a cultural imperialist point of view, they came motivated by a sense of racial and religious superiority. And part of the motivations behind the historical subjugation of India and its Hindu populace has been to assert cultural religious dominance over who they saw as inferior people. Now, with that, not only do they see the people as inferior, they see their beliefs as inferior, they see their knowledge systems as inferior, they see their culture and traditions as inferior. So all of these become open targets for that strategy of degradation and demoralization. And what the third element of this sort of campaign is one that has been traced specifically to the US in the last 200 years. So, beyond the powers that actually came and invaded or colonized the Indian subcontinent, there's the United States in the New World, which in the 1800s experienced a lot of debates internally about fractures and fissions within its own society, especially regarding the conflict between Protestants, who were the founders of the Republic, who were the founders of much of the American morality and political philosophy, and what they saw as minorities who could not be assimilated into the country. So Catholics, Roman Catholics, Orthodox Christians, and Jews. In many parts of the US, these groups were not considered fully white. They were not considered suited for democracy. They were seen as semi-civilized. And when Catholics began to ask for the right to manage their own educational institutions in the US. Around the same time, there was a lot of atrocity literature being written about India and about these idolatrous practices of the savage, barbaric Hindus. And because in the public imagination, Catholics or Orthodox Christians had already been established as semi-idolatrous, that they had iconography of Jesus and the Mother Mary in their places of worship, or they were seen as having a dual loyalty, that they would be more loyal to the Pope than to the President or to the United States. They used India as a blank canvas on which they projected their fears. And they said that, if you give these Catholics even an inch, if you let them manage their own educational institutions, let them run their schools, then we'll be halfway to becoming like India, where women throw their children under the Jagannath Puri Yatra, so under the chariot, for the glory of their barbarous god. And there were many newspaper articles around this frenzy in the American media. There were many cartoons written about them. For example, they called it the American Ganges. There's a famous cartoon published in national newspapers, which had on one side of the river, there's a river flowing, it's called the American Ganges. On one side of it is the Vatican, and you have the Basilica there, and it's the old world. And on the other side is a brave Protestant teacher who's holding these children and protecting them from the crocodiles inside the water. And those crocodiles are these idolatrous, semi-civilized practices, which they really very elegantly used the atrocity literature being written about India by missionaries or by colonialists to poison the minds of their own people, to justify their own bigotry, that they hated Catholics, they hated Jews, they hated Orthodox Christians. And this way they could get away with it by saying that, we've seen for ourselves what this leads to. It's in their own benefit that we prevent them from becoming this degraded civilization like Indians, like Hindus.
No, thank you very much. The very good opening that you made here, Sanjayji. You have been trying to set the narratives. We have often talked about that if we don't fix our narrative, things will not change. As Ruchir just now mentioned, that they would describe the American Ganges and our festivities in a very pejorative way. So we are in the we are celebrating Durga week, Durga Mata ki week, and it will be followed by Diwali. And this is a powerful statement that we are observing Hindu Heritage Month. How do we create this entire thing that We are not seculars. The whole world's problem is as if we are responsible for everything that is happening around the world, and they all point fingers at us. We are the minority abusers, we are the minority chasers, we hate Muslims. They will talk to Taliban and China and Pakistan, but India can't. As if India is to be blamed for everything. We are working on that narrative. You have done an outstanding job with Jaipur Dialogue, and we are now in extension in Jaipur Dialogue USA. What is the next step that we need to take in this Hindu Heritage Month? How do we take that Durga Mata की आवाज और ये अमेरिकन को बता दें कि दुर्गा माता की creation जो है is also to kill some evil. Let's go for that.
Well, I think we've got to be very, very intolerant. And lest you misunderstand me, we have to be very, very intolerant of intolerance. And I am simply drawing from the Karl Popper paradox, which I think all of us know. What is the Karl Popper paradox? What does it say? And I actually, after delineating what is Karl Popper paradox, which I guess the very, very eminent listeners of Jaipur Dialogues would mostly know, but very succinctly put, it says that unlimited tolerance must certainly lead to the end of tolerance. To explain it, that if you are tolerant of intolerance, if you tolerate intolerance, then the intolerance will actually overwhelm you in the end. And once you are overwhelmed, then the tolerance has gone out of the window. Only intolerance remains. It's just like giving space to a virus, tolerating a virus. Can you tolerate a virus? If you tolerate a virus and don't take any measures, or your body defense mechanism doesn't take any measures to tackle that virus, the virus is going to overwhelm your body and finish you off. And after that, what happens, we don't know. I mean, we would say that maybe we can take another birth, but some others will say maybe we will not, whatever. But the point is that I think that we have actually forgotten the Krishna Niti and the Chanakya Niti. And we have misinterpreted some of our more wholesome prescriptions in a way that has actually made us defenseless. And I have done an episode on the three of these. And the three of these are, number one is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is almost always misinterpreted. And why it is misinterpreted is because Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is actually mentioned in a context that is very different from the material concept. We know that in the Indian system, we have what is called Adhyatmik, we have the Adhibhautik, and we have the Adhidaivik. Now, what we do in our day-to-day affairs is what is Adhibhautik, or the material world. Now, what we call Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam actually comes from Mahopanishad. It is an adhyatmic concept. It is to be used at the highest level of consciousness, at the level of Cheta, at the level of oneness of all beings, which in the material world, in the differentiated material world, the manifested material world, is not found. So when you use that context, that adhyatmic concept in the adhibhautik setting, you make a fool of yourself. And in fact, there's a story in Hitopadesh that says exactly that. There's a Hitopadesh story. I don't know whether of course, I have narrated it to Vibhuti Ji a couple of times. So he would recall that. I don't know whether Ruchir has heard of that or not, because that's a very simple story. There's a jackal and there is a deer, and the jackal happens to visit the deer, and the deer is fooled by his recitation of Sanskrit, where he actually recites this very shlok, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And then he says that, okay, this is Sanskrit chanting jackal. It must be very good. Let me take him to my place. And the jackal, of course, only wanted to eat him up, and because he thought that the deer was too swift, and so he needed to deceive him. He had a friend, a crow. The crow immediately warned him. He would not heed the warning. He said, no, 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 no. This jackal is damn good. He recites Sanskrit shlokas. So he's got to be good. Then ultimately he got trapped. That he was rescued by his friend, the crow. So the moral of the story is that do not use something said in one context in a different context. That is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And the second one, of course, is Ahinsa Paramo Dharma. That Ahinsa Paramo Dharma is meant to be that problem in this is the definition of Ahinsa. The definition of Ahinsa, again, that Ahinsa is again an Adhyatmic concept. And you use Ahinsa, Gandhiji, I'm sorry to say, Gandhiji was not really an Adhyatmic person. He was very much what is called a man of the world. And I'm not even sure whether he was trying to seek the Adhyatma. He's probably trying to act Adhyatmic. I'm not very charitable towards Mahatma Gandhi. Let me put that disclosure. And therefore, he made a mincemeat of that concept, and he made into, again, a material kind of non-violence, which meant that you don't kill anybody. Whereas the Ahinsa, as an Adhyatmic concept, only means that you are doing something that you are not attached to. That's why yasya krito bhavo buddhir yasya na lipyate attvasa iman lokan na hanti na nibadyate. This is Bhagavad Gita 18.17, where he says that if you are you have taken yourself into a state where you are not attached to your actions, then it does not matter whether you're killing somebody for the sake of dharma, that you're doing it as a duty. And of course, the whole Bhagavad Gita is actually exhorting Arjuna to do his duty. So that is the second one. And the third one, of course, is Ekam Sadvipra Bahudha Vadanti. Now, here again, the problem is the definition of dharma. So the definition of dharma is the problem. So when you start treating adharma as dharma, and you say that the adharma also leads to the same result as dharma, then it becomes problematic. So I think that's the reason that we have been tolerating this intolerant behavior towards us. We have been giving ourselves some kind of, we've been actually indulging in self-flagellation and getting into a process of self-loathing when others tell us this, because we always look at this, okay, sarva dharma samabhav and things of those kinds. And because we have been looking at our own wisdom through the Western lenses, so these kind of distortions have come in, and these distortions confused us. Then, of course, the kind of atrocity literature and things that go on everywhere, and you do not have the anchor of wisdom that your tradition has given you, then you fall into these errors. That's my opening statement.
Thank you very much. A powerful opening statement, for the simple reason that you have definitely identified that we ourselves are to be blamed for not rejecting intolerance and subjecting ourselves to living with intolerant behavior. Like people are asking, and this is what brings me to the thought process that, when we recognize this problem that we have been responsible for treating ourselves as we treat, then people have a desire, will definitely attempt to subject you to those humiliations. And that has led to Indians seeking validation from others for everything that we do. We have a tendency, दुनिया क्या कहेगी, लोग क्या कहेंगे, ये हमारे, every day we think about लोग क्या कहेंगे, दुनिया क्या कहेगी. Does China care for Tiananmen Square? It did whatever it did. Did President Xi think about anybody else when he declared himself president for life? Right? Imagine if Modi does that here, or if a US president were to do that, or any democratic nation were to do that. That would be a mayhem around the world. Democratic traditions, or Modi has become Z, but Modi will become dictator. They will not say Modi is doing what Z is doing, but everybody wants India to be like China without being like China. These are all distortions in the way we look at things. And that brings me to the very important point which Sanjayji was talking about. Where do we fix it? It begins from us. And we got to begin to fix it. So whatever happens in India, people will beat a drum and then we will say, we are investigating, we will report. Tell them to go to hell. I'm saying we have to begin to be politely resistant to people who have no business to ask me question about myself without fixing your own door and your own house. So, Ruchir, where do you think it begins from? Which are the things that we need to insist upon? That leave us as we are and we will do what we are doing. You fix yourself. And to that end, I'm very fond of this word reciprocity. When are we going to demand reciprocity? For I believe no Muslim country or nobody has a right to ask us about our affairs until they fix their own.
Well, to build on both your question and what Sanjayji mentioned, there's an excellent book that I recommend all viewers to read. It's called After Defeat, How the East Learned to Live with the West. It's written by a Turkish scholar, Ayşe Zavigul. And she talks about how when historical civilizations experience defeat at the hands, particularly of the West, or of a civilization that is diametrically opposed to their values, there is a process of shame that is internalized by the elites of that country, wherein they actually start to believe the criticisms of the victors. So the victors will say that you lost, you are an inferior country, an inferior race, you deserve an inferior position in the world because you're not Western enough, because you're not modern enough, because you're not Christian enough, because you're not secular enough. And it's our foolishness or our weakness that the elites of society, the policymakers, actually internalize it. They believe it. They start to believe it, and it starts to shape their policies. And a lot of policy making in countries that experience this sort of trauma, that can be Japan, it can be Turkey, it can be Russia, it can be India, is motivated by this loss of face and this inferiority complex that now we have to prove to them that we're not inferior and that we can be as modern as them, as Western as them, as secular as them, without realizing that this is just a rhetorical game. It's just a trap to fool us into inaction, that it's designed to keep us busy trying to solve issues that don't exist, instead of consolidating and giving people the dignity and sovereignty that was taken away from them so cruelly. So now, I'm very happy that Vibhuti Ji, you mentioned reciprocity. Reciprocity is a fundamental principle of international relations and of foreign affairs. And self-respecting countries don't allow themselves to be pushed around. They have a clear understanding of why their nation exists, what its place is and should be. They have a common identity, a common binding in a unifying ideology of national liberation and identity. They have a social contract. So the state exists for a reason. The state exists in order to give certain advantages or certain opportunities to the citizens, and in return, the citizens are loyal to it. Now, none of these have been pursued properly or wholeheartedly by the post-independence Indian state. We just seemed grateful that the master has granted us independence, and now we have to keep everything the way it was in 1947 or in 1950 when the constitution came into a place, or for some people in 1977 when the emergency gave us a brand new constitution in the same old garb, and we're unable to change that. As a result, the Indian state has now found itself in a world that has changed in material circumstances, in economic circumstances, in the power dynamics between countries. But we still have the tools of a freshly independent state that exists to beg for further validation. That, oh, we were so well behaved, so you gave us independence. If we keep behaving well, one day you'll throw us a seat on the UN Security Council as well. So let's accumulate all these good boy points. And at one point, the master will pat us on the head and said, "You're very good, loyal service. Here's a biscuit." Now, that mentality has to change. That we have to learn from other countries that similarly, they experienced humiliation, they experienced colonization, they experienced traumatic invasions and destructions, attempted destructions of their culture. And they used this to forge unity. That if you look at Vietnam, for example, that what kind of history are they taught in Vietnam? They don't learn about the names of the Chinese kings or the French presidents that attempted to colonize them and make them part of their imperial ventures. The history of Vietnam, as taught in Vietnamese schools and universities, is the history of resistance. They always talk about the indigenous resistance, the rebels who fought against Chinese imperialism for 900 years, who fought against French imperialism for 100 years, who fought against American imperialism for 30 years. And as a result, they have a clear idea of what they have suffered in order to reach where they are and what their vision is for the future. Similarly, China is very clear on what it wants to do, where it wants to be 100 years from now. They want to avenge what they see as the century of humiliation, when the West opened them up forcibly, forced opium down their throats, destroyed their society, politics, economy, and they want to restore their place as the Middle Kingdom, as the center of the world, the center of civilization, center of economic activity, of industrial activity, and of even moral and spiritual knowledge production and generation. Now, this is what we need to learn from. And most countries in Asia have adopted some form of clear national unifying ideology and defend that with great gusto. They, and India is a signatory to this as well. In 1993, various Asian countries came together in Bangkok and they signed the Bangkok Declaration on Human Rights, which said that human rights has been, as a concept, is being misused by the West to interfere in the domestic affairs of post-colonial countries. And these countries are sovereign states that have the right to define what rights mean within their context. And that is their internal matter, which they collectively defend. Singapore does this, Malaysia does this, Indonesia does it, China does it, everyone does it except India, because we don't think strategically. And we don't think strategically because we're not programmed. The state institutions, the state tools of governance that we have are not designed to be productive soil for this sort of strategic thinking or national regeneration or rebirth. They're designed to be an axe. An axe can only be used to cut down a forest, not to plant a new forest, and not to build a fence around your forest either.
Yes, purpose and the instrument to use. Sanjayji, you have been in bureaucracy for a very long time, and you have amazing knowledge of our own texts. So while we had Sushruta, but modern doctors need FRCS from UK. We had Wealth of Nations, but we want to study Adam Smith's wealth. We had Kautilya Arthashastra, but we have to study Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. My thought process is something like this: that, you know, where do we begin the fix? I mean, think about it like this point of view, that even freeing the temples, we have to fight a case. We have to file a case. मंदिर पे मॉस्क बना हुआ है, वो दिखता है सबको, लेकिन फिर भी हमें वो केस जीतना है, right? Whereas these temples were destroyed and mosques were built over it. When can we have a self respect? Is there something in the legislation that prevents successive governments to not free the temples? Is it a bureaucratic issue? Is it a legal issue? Or is it just an issue of political strength and will?
Well, I would agree with Ruchir. It's a mental colonization issue. And just as he said, he put it beautifully that, okay, that you were behaved well, so you were given that little prize of what is called independence. And if you continue behaving well, you will keep getting biscuits. So when the aspiration doesn't go beyond biscuits, then the whole mental conditioning becomes like that. So I think that is the crux of the matter. That is why it is happening. If you look at even our constitution, and I have talked about it earlier also. In fact, I begin very much. I think we talked. I think Ruchir, if you remember, I think I talked about it. That the Indian system, in the Indian system, the rights are given to you. Everybody enjoys rights, but the rights are not given just for the sake of the rights. The rights are given to you to fulfill your duties. That is what the dharma is. That, in order to perform your dharma, which can be of various hues, various colors, various shades, for that you need those functional rights, not just rights for the sake of itself. And the West has always defined two kind of rights. It's always been a binary. So you have on one side you have the individual rights, and on the other side you have the divine rights. And you go in the divine rights space, then you have a very, very curious situation. For instance, with Islam. And as you said, reciprocity, that we have never insisted upon. Because I think one of the more beautiful quotes, which I have repeated quite often, it is attributed to Yogi Adityanath, but we don't know whether it is actually his or somebody else's. But I have kind of internalized it, and I keep talking about it again and again. Okay, that I, for instance, with respect to Islam, let's say, same thing can be said with respect to Christianity, with respect to the West, with respect to socialism, Marxism, all kind of these nonsensical theories that are going around can be said in the same measure. But let's say this as if we have to talk to Islam, then you say that, okay, I will fully respect your prophet, but only as much as you respect Sri Ram. And I will respect your religion, but only as much as you respect my religion. And yes, I would definitely respect Allah only as much as you respect Ishwar. But we have seen in this country that this Ishwar Allah Tere Naam was sung in thousands of temples. But I have been trying to locate, trying to ask for instances, trying to ask for any little clip or any little photograph to show me whether Ishwar Allah Tere Naam was sung even once in a mosque. Nobody's reassured me that it was sung even once. There isn't a single instance. There isn't a single instance. And so that's what I say, that you first tolerate intolerance like this, and then you complain. So I think it's a futile exercise. You have to assert yourself. You have to get out that mental colonization. And as Ruchir again rightly said about teaching history or teaching your culture, unless you teach your own history, the history of resistance of India by Indians is magnificent. But you can teach a few books on the resistance mounted by Maharana Pratap or Shivaji Raje. Those would inspire generations, but you dismiss them in one para each. And what do you teach? You teach the history of the Mughals, one depraved Mughal after another. Useless kind of rulers who brought India down in the Committee of Nations, brought the GDP down, and even that GDP which they tom-tom about, and which a lot of our people, especially the Aligarh school historians, they say that, okay, that Mughals did great things. What great things they did, we don't know, because we haven't seen any hospitals from that time, any universities, any canal systems, any great roads, nothing. They only added to a few graves and few shrines over those graves. And they concentrated all the wealth with themselves. Right now, I think I can tell the viewers, Sandeep Balakrishna is writing a beautiful series on the state of the general public and the state of the elites in Jahangir's time. It makes fascinating reading. You know that, okay, that the common people were absolutely, their dregs. They were just able to keep just their body and soul together. And the rich and the elite, they were flourishing absolutely in untold opulence. But we are not taught that. So correct history, then understanding of our culture. We don't know even our basics. We try and learn everything from the Western lens, which is binary. We don't even know that our logic system, which is given in the Nyaya Shastras, is multi-valued. The minimum value is 3. There's always that, what we call the true, the false, and the in-between. That's the minimum that we have, the 3-valued system. Otherwise, that famous Chatushkoti system that what we have, where we begin from what is called Mithya, then go to Sanjay, then go to Shraddha, and then finally go to Satya or Vishwas. That is also practiced in Buddhism. And of course, there are extremes also, like the Jain Saptabhanga system, where you have 7 values. It's too crazy. I don't go that far. So we don't know that we have a different sense of time. We have a different time concept. We have a different logic concept. Our epistemology is closest to this epistemology of science. But we are not able to proclaim that. We are not able to tell it to the world. Why? Because we don't know that ourselves.
That's right.
So these are the things. I mean, first thing is that a lot of things we have to learn about ourselves. And second is, if you ask me too, that we learn, if we say that there is one dogma that we can internalize, I don't normally advocate dogma, But we can always have this dogma of what is called self glory. That is a very healthy dogma to have. And based on that, you be absolutely intolerant to intolerance. So I think just two of these are sufficient to lift you up in the eyes of the other countries. Right now, they know that you are a soft target.
Right.
And they also know they have studied you better than you studied yourself. All the Indologists, that's entire this flourishing business of Indology, they know that if you realize yourself what you are, if Hindus realize themselves what they are, then the Christianity and Islam and all the Marxism, everything, they don't stand a chance in the world. That is why the individual rights theory, uh, as it came about, and the divine rights theory, both of them would be discredited. If both of them are discredited, then the world goes in a very proper dharmic direction.
I think you said it very correctly, and I applaud you for that because we belong to the same school of thought. Is that the attack on us is because they haven't studied us better than we know about ourselves, and they recognize that with the advent of science and technology, many dogmas and restrictions are falling apart. That's what is important. They recognize that. Think about it technology. Technology has no religion, there is no dogma. Geneva, New York, and Delhi are talking at this same time in exactly at the same moment live to a global audience. This is happening globally. And that's what is a threat to the existing order, if I may say so. As you know, that I always call this religious mafia, very organized. They are very doctrinaire, and they impose their will on the unsuspecting or people like us who are more respecting or given to the fact okay wo achhe honge. It's time for us to reorient ourselves. So Ruchir, coming to you on this subject, very very subject matter, which are the which are the things that come to your uppermost thing? Like Sanjayji said, two things. I call that Lakshman Rekha, draw your own line, this far and no further. What is happening is that the world is telling us what to do, and we keep thinking about doing log kya kahenge. We have virtually landed ourselves into geopolitical minefield in which we do not know where to tiptoe. Instead of taking a minesweeper, we try to tiptoe. And that's a crisis that we are facing of bravery, of bravado, as well as the strength of character. Where would you want the fix to begin if you were given the right to start? कहाँ से fix करना है? पहली कौन सी चीज fix करनी है? Where would you start with?
So, first of all, we have to change our mentality towards statecraft and foreign affairs. In order to do that, we have to develop a strategic thinking, a long term vision for what and where we want the country to be in the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. And once we set that goal, it's only once a goal is set that then we can set milestones of what we need to do. What break it down into steps. What needs to be done to achieve these goals? A lot of people for the past 20 years. I remember a time when President APJ Abdul Kalam said, his dream was to see India become a developed country by 2020. It's not enough to just say that. It's not enough to, it's very admirable that he went, around the country, school to school, university to university, to inspire young generation to dream of that. But it's not enough to just talk about it. There needs to be a clear policy direction that if we are to become a developed country, not stuck in the middle income trap, not stuck like a Latin American country that's a semi-colony. What do we need to do? What do we need to learn from successful countries? And how do we assert ourselves and resist the attempts to keep us down? Because the rest of the world, especially after the end of the Second World War and the end of the Cold War, have already mapped, the position relative to each other of which country belongs where. And India's position is as a large, poor country full of cheap labor and a big open market for finished goods, just like during East India Company times. That is the place that they have decided for us. We have to ask ourselves, is this acceptable to us? As a nation, as a state, as a civilization, is this something that we can be satisfied with and say, okay, we're an independent country, whatever that means, and this is our place in society, this is our place in the world. It's been decided by people wiser than us and more powerful than us. So let's put our heads down and enjoy the fruits of of our patience that this has been given to us. Or do we have a larger dream that we want to achieve, that we wish to pursue? If so, then we have to take steps in that direction. Now, at the moment, there are some green shoots coming out of the barren soil. For example, as we discussed, reciprocity. So recently, the United Kingdom said that Indian travelers coming to the UK who have been vaccinated with the Indian vaccines would be considered unvaccinated, despite the vaccine being the same as that used and developed in the UK, and would be subject to a 10-day quarantine because they were considered unvaccinated. Within a few days of this declaration, India put in reciprocal measures, saying that all United Kingdom citizens coming to India would also need to face a 10-day quarantine. That signaled that we were not willing to roll over on this particular issue. And quite soon, the situation was de-escalated by the UK, and the 10-day quarantine requirement for Indian citizens has been revoked. Now, this at a tactical level is good. That's a strong assertion using reciprocity and us acting as an equal power, not an inferior power that has to beg for permission or beg for approval. Now, we have to extend this mentality beyond just responsive, reactive foreign policy, but towards proactive foreign policy, setting the agenda for ourselves. That we have the unfortunate position geopolitically of having a hostile neighbor to the west and a hostile neighbor to the east. And both of these powers have powerful friends and strong connections, and one could even say a more savvy, realist foreign policy direction than India has had historically. Now, again, is this acceptable to us, or do we acknowledge our relative weaknesses and seek to address them? So we have to have an honest conversation about whether the approach to foreign policy, whether the tools of foreign policy, and by extension, the tools of domestic policy are suited for the 21st century to be an emerging power, not just a former colony, but a regional power in its own right, or a future developed country, or a future superpower, as people talk about. Then we have to act like a superpower. We have to act like a developed country. We have to act like a sovereign state. So Kwame Nkrumah, the first prime minister, first president of Ghana, he said, the best way to learn to be a sovereign state is to act like a sovereign state. That's a lesson that we never learned. This is someone who spent a lot of time with Nehru. If you read his books, you can see who he has seen when he talks about other countries that got independence before African countries and why they're not the example to be emulated. The rest of the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in the rest of Asia, they look at India as a wonderful example of what they don't want to be. Even our neighbors. You ask policymakers in Dhaka, in Colombo, in Thimphu, in Kathmandu, in Islamabad, what do they think of India? They say, oh, India is a great example of what we don't want to be. A country without a common identity, a country without a common ideology, a country without a social contract, and without a vision.
That's so very true. Identity is key, who you are and what you want to be. That's so important to define. And today our definition of our identity is completely hodgepodge. And we don't know ourselves, who we are, what we want, and where we want to go from here. That's a basic thing that I want to, I'm very concerned about, because our identity is key. Interestingly enough, living abroad, we have also one clear message from Americans here, at least I know. They love us as immigrants to this country. And I won't go to the reasons why. Everything is good. But point of the matter remains that we have not been able to claim our clout, build our reputation, extract what we deserve because we don't know how to ask. And that's what is a big challenge for us. We scream and shout when we are hurt, but we do not know how to frame the issue to ask something. And that's our challenge. Look at it this way. And Sanjayji, I would come to you for that. And my personal opinion is on that, is that unless and until we define ourselves, people will always impose things on us. That's what we have been talking about. We haven't defined things. Freedom of religion, in my humble opinion, is a concept which is not relevant for India because we always practiced it. We are Sanatanis. Pray or don't pray doesn't matter. How many times you pray doesn't matter. The karmic philosophy is about your karma. What you do will define you. So these are the issues. Why haven't we been able to carry this forward, Sanjay? Why? What ails us? Is it because we are lazy, or we are lotus eaters, or we are just frigging idiots, to use the American slang?
Well, it's a bit of a bit of everything, actually. And I think Ruchir put it quite beautifully. We're talking about identity. The very basic definition of the Indian identity is a civilization identity. We haven't even differentiated between the different concepts of nations. And we simply take that definition of the European nation state, which is purely based on race. It's a racist and ethnic concept, the nation state, the European nation state. And it is born out of a great fratricidal war, a 60-year war. The Treaty of Westphalia that we got in 1649 came after a great war. And of course, we know the Islamic nation. The concept is purely religious. The Indian nationhood concept is civilizational. There is no doubt about that. It is a civilizational concept. But I find that people are making fundamental mistakes in even defining that civilizational concept. And they reduce it to geography. When we see certain big wigs of the RSS defining DNA as the marker of nationhood, then you can only hold your head in dismay and depression. A civilizational entity like India is fundamentally opposed to a religious and a racist concept of nationhood. One needs to be absolutely clear about it. You cannot say that ours is an all-embracing civilization. So even if the virus comes in, we'll embrace the virus as well. That's civilizational identity, which I think Savarkar defined quite beautifully. He said it's not just the geography, it's not just the Pitrabhumi. It also has to be your Purnabhumi. Just being Pitrabhumi or the land of your ancestors is not enough. You also have to consider it as your sacred land. If your sacred lands are outside India, then you do not identify with it civilizationally. That fundamental clarity has to be there. It's that clarity about identity, the clarity about ideology, and it's not as if it's not there. It's very much there within the Indian wisdom. I think we just need to make a little bit of effort and Either find it ourselves, or I would say listen to the lot of talk that is going on these days. I think anybody who wants to really look for these things, you will find it all over the social media, whether it's on YouTube or on these days even on Clubhouse. Of course, I don't enjoy Clubhouse too much. There's too much of clutter around there. But it's available. It's available. But something that is not available. When I was growing up, I used to, especially when I was in college in Calcutta, and I was, I should say, I was seeking a lot of things, and then I had to spend a whole day. Sometimes I would travel to the Ramakrishna Mission, go around and sit in their library and try and find out. But the whole day would be gone, and I think I would be able to just go through one book, or not even one book. Or I had to go sometimes, I just still remember I was looking for Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia, and I couldn't find it anywhere in Calcutta. So I went to the National Library and got it issued. And it took me 3 visits, and I don't know how many hours I spent. Today, you can get it on the flip of a switch. And you can even get commentaries on that from just so many places, so many people. So it's so much easier today should you have the desire. So I think let's put it this way: let's cultivate the desire, and let's provide the means to fulfill that desire.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we are nearing 1 hour of our time. We have a few questions. To the viewers, request like, share, subscribe to Jaipur Dialogue USA. In addition to subscribing to Jaipur Dialogue, don't forget to subscribe to Jaipur Dialogue USA as well. There is a very interesting saying, Ruchir. कहते हैं कि you never give up sure footing for a killer blow. It's a very powerful statement. You don't give up your sure footing for a killer blow, because if you miss it, then you are at a disadvantage. Your enemy takes full advantage. In the game of soccer, it's called when the defensive team you're attacking takes the fast break, right? And he gives the fast break and scores a goal over you. Where does India belong in the game of international ramifications that are going on? Where do we belong? Sometimes I feel we are pretty rudderless, because from occasional sharp stance like the COVID thing with Britain happened, I was very happy to see that. But I don't see a very categorical moving forward, delineating our stand in the world of geopolitics. I continue to feel we are so concerned about who are we friends with: China, Russia, Japan, America, and in between we have a stupid thing called Napakistan, as I call it. We have never been able to deal with anyone in a manner that defines our thinking. And look at China, for example. I gave this example earlier on, that China, does any China give a crap for anybody who accuses it of human rights violation? Pakistan is still asking for evidence against 2611. So when our enemies are exploiting our strength, what do we need to do next?
Well, it's a good analogy you brought up with football. That I feel that until recently, India didn't even acknowledge that there was a game being played, and now that more and more people have opened their eyes to the fact that geopolitics is not about moral posturing, but is a game of national self-interest and its pursuit. That it's a cynical and realist game that operates under some sort of rules, and those rules are you pursue your own interests and expect others to as well, and those that don't get crushed or swept to the side. It's good that we've now acknowledged this and have started to learn how to play the game, but we're still very much minnows in the overall big picture. quite similar to our actual Indian football team, which has, to its credit, tried very hard over the past 20, 25 years that I've at least followed it, to improve its understanding of the tactics and strategy involved, improve the physicality of its players, to get the benefit of international exposure, to be trained, from models that have worked elsewhere. So that's very promising. Similarly, it's time to embark on that level of reform for our state and its foreign policy organs. That at the moment we do not have a very large foreign service cadre. The IFS is quite small for a country, for an economy of our size, with the size of the diaspora that we have, with the historical links that we have with so many countries. We should be deploying many more diplomats. We should be employing many more local experts. Our embassies should be hubs of cultivating local assets in every country. The IFS, the Ministry of External Affairs, should work hand in hand with our intelligence agencies. There should be a large deployment of our intelligence agents at every embassy, at every consulate, also working to massage people's minds over there, to schmooze with media barons, to cultivate relationships with local ministers, with local administrators. This is how the game is played. We need to be engaging lobbyist firms, professional lobby firms in Washington, D.C., in London, in Brussels, in Moscow, and in major capitals of major powers, in order to build the kind of symbiosis that is needed. That in the West, we have to recognize there's not some idealized, clean, transparent system of governance there too. The only reason there's no corruption in these countries is that there's no perceived corruption. They've legalized corruption. It's called lobbying. So you're supposed to lobby them. That's the expected thing. And our neighbors do this. Islamabad is very good at hiring lobbyists in capital cities in like Washington, D.C. and in London. Very good at cultivating its diaspora to forward and push state propaganda narratives. And the fact that we don't do this, in fact, we haven't even tried to do this in an effective way, is not showering us with any reward for being, we're the morally superior power, we take the high ground, we don't play dirty. That's your foolishness that you don't play dirty. It doesn't stop the others from doing so. They just see, it's the minnows, you can dive in front of them, you can tackle them hard, they don't retaliate, they'll just run to the referee and complain that it was unfair. Yes, after you lose 8-0 and then complain to the referee, that it wasn't fair, that's very unfortunate, but it doesn't help anyone.
I'm glad you picked on the football analogy, because I always have, Sanjayji knows that I bring about sports as sports is my ultimate teacher, coach, mentor.
I'll have to leave in a while because I have another show.
No, we are coming to a close.
So
we are we are now closing the show, and with one observation that reciprocity is the key for us. Hindus demand reciprocity. That's important. You want to build your mosque and a church, I have equal right to build a temple as well. If we don't demand
questions.
I'm sorry? Yeah, we are going to the questions now. We are going to the questions now in a minute. So I was saying that we have to begin to ask, the reciprocity is key to the going forward. So let's begin the questions. Viewers, like, subscribe, and share. Press the bell icon and support as always. Thank you very much. Let's go to the questions, gentlemen. Karan Batraji, thank you, Karanji. Thank you. Appreciate that. Ram Ram. Next. Abhiyan saying, Vijay sir, don't you think there is more money being paid by certain institutions to the people who defame Hinduism? The vice versa is not present. Sanjayji, would you like to address that?
Well, let me look at the question.
He says that don't you think there is more
I
money
think
being
that more
paid by
money paid by
certain
certain
institutions
institutions, people.
to defame
Yes,
Hinduism?
certainly. That's because we don't claim it, so somebody else will.
Yeah, yeah,
They are, they have developed those systems to claim that money.
that's right.
We
Next.
also
They have
have to
a
create those
sophisticated
systems.
system of patronage in which they identify academics, journalists who can be brought into the fold, who can be fed with talking points, who can be wined and dined, and it's very effective.
That's right.
This is the standard currency in that field.
Next question is Chaitanya. Chaitanya, Ruchirji, do you accept Churchill's comment that India is no more a political personality than Europe is? What are your thoughts as we are too diverse?
I'm very glad that this question has been asked because a lot of people claim that, oh, because X country is diverse, because Y country is large, because Z country is multi ethnic, that makes it somehow less legitimate or less deserving of sovereignty and less cohesive as a policy making unit. However, that denies what we call the civilizational identity. That the modern state is very new, but what is India as a concept? It's existed for millennia. It exists in the hearts and minds of the people and has consistently for thousands of years. So people have always had a clear idea of what India is and is not, of their belonging to India, regardless of what language they spoke, regardless of what regional sub identity they had, regardless of what specific polity was administering their region of the country. There's still a cohesive idea of what India is, be it Jambudweep, be it Bharat, be it Hindustan, be it Hinduvi Swaraj. Throughout history, there's been a clear understanding of what this unifying sense of Indianness is. So if we compare that to Europe, the concept of Europe, the concept of the West, the concept of Christendom were always defined as exclusionary. It was just that, so West is just a rebranding, or Europe is just a rebranding of what used to be called Christendom, the Christian world, as opposed to the Muslim world, the Ottoman Turks, or the Muslim rulers of Andalusia, what's now Spain and Portugal, that they defined themselves as a certain identity in the past, and now they've had to reinvent that and learn it as well. That what does it mean to be European because of the European Union? So I think India is much more a cohesive, political, civilizational personality, to use your term, than Europe is, and historically has been. In fact, the European Union is trying to be more like the Indian Union of States. They will never admit it, but that is their goal.
Thank you. We'll keep the answers to the questions short because Sanjayji has another show coming, which is his most popular Ask Me Anything segment. So before you step out, so let's go to the next question. Hindu priests and religious scholars were always dependent on patronage of Kshatriyas and Vaishyas. How did idea of Brahmin supremacy come in academia? Sanjayji?
Oh, I think that's a much discussed subject, and we know that it's all uh, set up by the Indologists, starting with the German Indologists in the late 19th century. It's only about 150 years old. And it's the crying shame. It's our crying shame that we've not been able to dismantle this in the last 70 years. It's only now that the efforts have begun, but most of them are outside the establishment. And I think that has to do with what Ruchir said, that we have not taught people our history. And with one simple instance that I give is that I would love to make anybody a Brahmin, provided he accepts those 127 restrictions that are given in the Manusmriti. Being a Shudra under the Manusmriti code was actually a great liberation, because he had to adhere to just 3 restrictions. That's all. So between 3 restrictions and 127 restriction, which is more liberating? But no, supremacist. A guy cannot even have a bank account. Today, if you want to become a Brahmin, you cannot keep even a bank account. You know that. How many people would want to do that? You have to uh, have your bread only through alms, by going around by only you have to be uh, you have to agree to be supported by the community alone. You cannot earn anything by yourself. I want to know who all want to do that. If somebody accepts even these two, I think he deserves to be granted Brahminhood. It was an existence of extreme austerity and extreme asceticism. It is only then that this society gave them such respect. And to say that they were supremacist, I mean, nah. Tell me a guy who doesn't have a bank account and can actually rule over people. I would love. Ruchir, can you tell me a guy?
No, there's a very simple answer to this. That when the Portuguese first came to India, when the British first came to India, they found that the biggest obstacle to conversions to Christianity was the Brahmin priests. So, in order to delegitimize them and leave people rootless and disconnected from their culture, from their traditions, just like they did in South America, just like they did in Africa with traditional religions, they sought to decapitate Hindu society. And this is where the invention of this atrocity literature came from.
Thank you. Next question. Chaitanya, once again. Sanjayji, India is trying to be Ajat Shatru like Yudhishthir, not knowing Duryodhan and Shakuni, also known as China and Pak, who say they do not want to live under the same sky. What would be your message to India be?
My message to, not to India, but to Yudhishthir would be that today's Yudhishthir is not listening to Krishna. He should listen to Krishna.
Chahat Chauhan, thank you very much. The day starts retaliating, there will be no more attacks. The situation will be upside down. We need to let go our good boy syndrome. Bhaya bin hoye na preet.
I agree entirely.
Yeah, totally agree. You have to show, you have to draw your Lakshman Rekha and be intolerant at times. You can't be perpetually submissive, perpetually seeking, and perpetually seeking approval. Thank you very much, Chahat. Next.
Power respects power, not morality.
Yes.
Exactly.
Next. Chaitanya, once again, Ruchirji and Vibhuti, should India RAW have a division which employs Indian diaspora to work for India for science and tech enhancement?
Absolutely.
That's not Raw's job.
There should be an attempt at this, just like China does, just like Iran does, just like even Pakistan does. How do you think the father of the bomb, of the Islamic bomb, as they call it in Islamabad, gained access to that technology? It was because the diaspora was weaponized. As I mentioned earlier, by cultivating allies and agents within the existing Indian communities abroad, that is a much stronger way to leverage our influence than what we've been attempting at the moment with with Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, and just being happy that, oh yes, look, we have so many people around the world. Yes, so now what's the next step? Have them see it that it's in their interest to further the goals of their motherland and give them an avenue to do it. There's many people who want to serve their nation, regardless of where they are. They want to serve their civilization. Give them that opportunity.
Absolutely. And it is not only science and technology, it is also about culture. It's all about economic intelligence. It's about varieties of things that needs to be shared, brought about without breaking the law. Next question. We must, Chahat Chauhan once again, we must stop proving our traditions scientifically for acceptance. Our traditions are our traditions, period. What do you think, Sanjay?
Yes, that's a position that's even accepted by the Supreme Court of India. Even the English common law, which we practice, even that accepts it. So our law is not our law. It is basically Christian theology dressed up as uh, law, because law basically means God's command in
That's
Christian
right.
theology. But even that law has this definition. The traditions are those that you believe in. That's all. Their basic whole thing is belief.
Right.
So the traditions, by that token, are exactly what we practice. That's all. You don't have to prove scientifically. Does anybody care to prove scientifically that Jesus was resurrected? Can you prove it scientifically?
It's a symptom of that inferiority complex, that if we feel that we need to get validation for everything, it just shows our own lack of faith in our traditions. There's no other country, there's no other culture that does this. Israelis don't feel the need to go prove their mythology and their literature and their traditions, just as Saudis don't, just like Confucians don't.
Thank you.
Correct.
Next. Thank you, viewers. Like, subscribe, and support our channel. And we'll see you next Sunday. Same time, same place. Different faces. Satyamev Jayate.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Sanjayji, and thank you.